Okay, in the next two videos, we're going to be talking about another one of Australia's goals, which is the goal of low inflation or price stability. Basically, inflation occurs when there's a sustained increase. So the word sustained, generally it needs to persist for a period of longer than 3 months in the average level of prices in the economy. So if on average things are becoming more expensive and your money is losing its purchasing power, then we're considered to be experiencing inflation. The goal of inflation is to achieve prices increasing by around 2 to 3% per year on average over sort of a 6 to 7 year period or over the course of the business cycle. We generally aim for 2 to 3% inflation per year. Inflation does not include one-off increases in price. So if it's just random products that are increasing in price, it has to be an increase in the average level of prices. So the majority of products have to be increasing in price, not just random products. It also doesn't include just if the price goes up for a couple of days and then drops back down. It has to be a sustained increase in the average prices in the economy. So two other words you'll hear, the word deflation. Deflation is when the average prices of goods and services are falling in the economy. So things are becoming cheaper on average. And the word disinflation means prices are rising, however, the rise in inflation is not as high as the previous year. So deflation means prices are going down. Disinflation means prices are still rising, just not as fast as they did last year. So if prices go from 5% increase by 5% in year one, and then say 3% in year two, then we're experiencing disinflation because prices are still increasing, but not as fast. So there's also a word called hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is when inflation grows really fast. I think the strict definition is if prices are doubling every day. So some countries in the past have experienced massive inflation. Venezuela, Germany after the war printed too much money and experienced hyperinflation. Zimbabwe was another country which experienced hyperinflation to the point where their currency basically became devalued, or you couldn't use it anymore. So Australia's inflation rate, as you can see, since this is in 2014, Australia's inflation rate's generally hovered between around 2.5% and mainly sort of 1.5%. So we're generally meeting our inflation goals, although you could say inflation has been below our target slightly in recent times, and that's synonymous with a lack of demand. So prices are growing quite slowly at the moment. So in terms of how we calculate inflation, inflation's calculated by the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and it's calculated on a quarterly basis, which means it's calculated every 3 months. So the ABS will get together every 3 months and have a look to determine whether prices are going up in the economy or down. Consumer Price Index is how we calculate inflation. So basically what they do is the ABS every 3 months will survey retail outlets, so shopping centres, Kmart, Myers, Coles, car shops, clothes shops, etc., to find out whether prices have increased or decreased. It includes imports because they're trying to get an indication of whether the things that Australians buy are becoming more or less expensive and the purchasing power of Australians. So every 3 months, the ABS surveys retail outlets. They go around and look at the prices of 100,000 different products. They go to restaurants as well. So his regimen refers to the 100,000 goods and services that are included when the ABS calculates inflation. Okay, so what they do is they have 100,000 products where they survey the retail outlets, then they divide them into 11 different categories. So the 11 different categories include food, clothing and footwear, housing. You don't have to memorize all of these, but basically they separate into different ways in which consumers spend their money, because it's all about consumer spending. Recreation and culture, education, communication, etc. And there's all these things within each one of them. So the food category would have the price of bananas, apples, oranges, Vegemite, bread, etc., etc. All clothing and footwear would be in clothing and footwear. Housing would include the price of things like house insurance, rent, etc., etc. And then so each of the different categories has things within each category. And basically what they do is each product within the CPI gets a weighting based on what percentage of the average family's household expenditure it makes up. So things that are purchased more frequently or make up a higher proportion of our income get weighted heavily, and things that have only a small percentage of our income get weighted have a very small weighting, and therefore they don't have as big of an impact on inflation when we're calculating how the price of things changes. So things that we purchase frequently that make up a high proportion of our income, it can be things we purchase frequently or things that are expensive that make up a high proportion of our income, like food and housing, get a high weighting, and things we consume less or that make up a smaller weight or a smaller percentage of the average family's expenditure get a smaller weighting. The weightings are reviewed every 5 years because basically people's spending patterns change. So the weightings have to reflect what the average family spends in different areas. So here are the weightings. You can see that for the 11 categories, so there's lots of things within each category, housing has a weighting of about 22.7%. What that's saying is that about 22.7% of household expenditure is on things related to the household. Okay, so rent would be the big one there. Food, we spend around 16% of our expenditure on food and non-alcoholic beverages. The average family spends around 7% on alcohol and tobacco and 2.7% on communication. So when we're calculating the CPI and working out whether inflation is increased, if housing increases in price, it has a bigger impact than the impact that increases in communication would have on the CPI. The bigger the weighting, the bigger impact it has on inflation. So what they do is they calculate two things, annual and annualized inflation or quarterly inflation. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky. But basically what they do is they compare prices to a base year first. So 2012 is what we call our base year, and that gets an index point of 100. What that basically means is we're using the prices in 2012 as a point of reference for all other price changes. So if we say that something's got an index of 107, that means prices are 7% higher now than they were in 2012. To calculate inflation for the period, we do the price index at the end of the period minus the price index at the beginning, divided by the price index at the beginning, times by 100. So basically what you're doing is comparing figures to 2012 first, and then comparing to what they were 3 months ago. So for example, if we've got a June 2015 CPI of 108.4, that means we've already worked out that prices are 8.4% higher in June 2015 than they were back in 2012. If the CPI was 106.2%, 106.2, not percent, in June 2014, it means prices were 6.2% higher than 2012 back in 2014. So to work out inflation between these two periods, or inflation for the year, so how much prices have increased from June 2014 to June 2015, we do the CPI in the second year, 108.4, minus the first year, 106.2, divided by the first year, then times by 100. So that tells us that prices have increased by 2.07% between June 2014 and June 2015. They haven't increased by 2.2%. You can't just deduct one CPI from the other. You've got to do the maths and divide it by 106.2 in this case. Okay, so in these figures here, what these figures are all telling us is that for March 2017, prices are 22% higher than they were back in 2012. If it's 110, they're 10% higher back in March 2015. If you wanted to work out your increase in inflation for the year, you'd do 122 and you'd compare it to March last year, which is 115. So it'd be 122 minus 115 divided by 115 times 100. And that would tell you how much inflation is for the year. If you wanted to do it for the quarter, for the last 3 months, you do 122 minus 118 divided by 118 times 100. That will tell you inflation for the quarter. Okay, so these figures tell us what prices are compared to what they were in 2012. Because prices are constantly increasing, the CPI is increasing. The only time it goes down is, you can see, from December 2015 or September to December 2015. That means prices went down in that quarter. And again, from September to December 2016, prices went down slightly. But every other quarter, prices went up slightly. Okay, so these index figures, if you look at some of these things, basically the red line, or sort of maroon sort of line, represents beer prices. So compared to 2012, beer prices have gone up by 25%. Rent prices have gone up by about 13%, and audio and visual has only gone up by about 2% compared to what they were in 2012. Because in 2012, they were all at 100. So you can see at this point here, they're all around 100. But this shows how much they've gone up. Okay, again, index figures go up consistently, just shows you that prices are constantly increasing. Thank you.